The absurdist movement. The idea of absurdism came from the idea of nihilism, which is the belief that life, religion, and moral principles are meaningless. Absurdism is the conflict between the human need to find value or meaning in life and the inability to find any. These ideas coexist with each other, but the difference between these two is that absurdism means accepting the absurd in life and living on in spite of it, it being the search for meaning and the lack of meaning. Kafka is generally recognized as the leader of the absurd movement, not just for the Metamorphosis, but also for The Trial, In the Penal Colony, and The Hunger Artist. Kafka brings together the surreal and the mundane, often not drawing a distinction between their treatment to create memorable and challenging nightmare escapes.
Franz Kafka was a Czech novelist born in 1883 Prague, which is now considered Czechoslovakia. He was a hard-working man for his family at an insurance company, a job he hated, meaning he could only work on his writing at night. While Kafka loved his younger siblings, he felt inferior to his father. He thought of his father as a tyrant, as shown in his novels known as The Trial and The Metamorphosis. Even with this conflict, he still lived with his father for the majority of his life, being repressed for so many years. But the true cause of his isolation was his inability to communicate correctly with all the relationships he had. Kafka found himself as an atheist, but still cherished both German and Czech culturations. And he was really isolated as he was born in a Jewish household, and he left his house for Berlin in 1923 to pursue his writing career on a vacation at Baltic Coast. He met a lady named Dora Diamond, a young Jewish woman who he fell in love with but never got married, and they stayed together until his final year, and he died in 1924 in a clinic near Vienna.
The Metamorphosis is a fictional novella written by Franz Kafka, published in 1915. In The Metamorphosis, the third-person limited omniscient narrator focuses on the perspective of the protagonist, Gregor Samsa. The narrator knows and reveals Gregor's innermost thoughts and occasionally reveals the inner thoughts of other characters as well. The title of Kafka's novella, The Metamorphosis, references the metamorphosis or change Gregor Samsa experiences as he transforms from a human to an insect-like creature. And so, in The Metamorphosis, Gregor Samsa, a traveling salesman, awakens one morning to discover he has turned into an insect-like creature, or as they say, a monstrous vermin. He lies in bed for a while thinking about the many unpleasant aspects of his career and his family's heavy reliance on his income. Seeing that he's late for work, he panics, worries at his boss's reaction, and contemplates calling in sick. Gregor's mother, father, and sister all call to him in his room. He responds in a strange voice that increases their concern. Meanwhile, Gregor tries to desperately maneuver his awkward new body with insect legs out of bed. Soon, Gregor's supervisor comes looking for Gregor. He accepts none of the family's excuses when Gregor tries to defend himself, no one can understand him because of his bug voice. Eventually, Gregor manages to unlock the door and come out. At the sight of him, his mother swoons, and his father clenches his jaw and fist, and then weeps. Gregor tries telling his supervisor what a dedicated worker he is, but his boss leaves the house in terror. Gregor's father then angrily hurries his son back into his room, injuring Gregor in the process. And over the following days, Gregor keeps hidden in his room by a mutual, unspoken understanding. Grit, his sister, becomes his caretaker, feeding him and cleaning his room when her parents and maid are not around. She performs her duties briskly without much attention to her brother. Meanwhile, Gregor spends his days reflecting on family and how he threw himself into this job in an effort to save his parents and his sister after the unfortunate collapse of his father's businesses some 5 years ago. Gregor thinks about his plans to save up and pay for his sister's education, and he worries that his aging parents are not well enough to work. Grit decides to move the furnishings out of Gregor's room to give him more freedom of movement now that he has these insect legs. His mother, who has not seen him since the first morning he changed into a bug, thinks these changes will upset Gregor, but she agrees to help. When she sees Gregor, she swoons, again, like the first time, and Grit scolds Gregor and escorts her hysterical mother from the room. Gregor goes to check on his mother just as Mr. Samsa, now employed and consistently wearing his uniform, even at home, returns from work. He blames Gregor for the unhappy scene and angrily pelts his son with apples, throwing them. One becomes lodged painfully in his back, Gregor's, and soon becomes infected, hastening Gregor's demise. As the days pass, Gregor uses a gap in his bedroom door to observe and listen to his family as they go about their daily routines. He learns that his mother and Grit now have jobs that the family have taken in three demanding boarders. All the while, Grit's attention to her brother declines now that she's working, and Gregor feels like a burden. He eats less and less, and one evening, Grit plays her violin. Gregor crawls into the living room to be near the lovely sound he hears, and the boarders, the ones staying, stop him and immediately announce that they are leaving because they've spotted him. In response, Grit tells her parents that they must do something about Gregor. Gregor hears the whole conversation. He makes his way back to the room, where he dies early, at 3 a.m. The Samsas both feel saddened and relieved by Gregor's death. They decide to treat themselves to a day in the countryside with fresh air and sunshine. There, they start envisioning a path forward without Gregor. Structure. How did the author structure/organize the book? And I put in media res, which means in the middle. Number 2. Why did he organize it in this way? And I said, Franz Kafka organizes his story in media res to grab the reader's attention and to begin at the apex of Gregor's life. This allows the author to kind of make use of the protagonist's unknown past and unknown future. This gives the readers a sense of urgency for the character. Third question was the organization effective? And I said, it was effective because it allows the readers to immediately be immersed in the story's rising action or climax, rather than having to go through his life, how he got there. But by immediately beginning in the story, right where it did, where he turns into a bug, the viewer is enticed by what happens next and how the protagonist is a bug, and what'll happen next.
Rhetoric. The author uses pathos and ethos while focusing mainly on pathos being the reader's opinions. Kafka uses these types of rhetoric to better influence Kafka's tone, and he tries to illustrate how he wants the readers to sympathize and even emphasize, he wants to emphasize and he wants the readers to sympathize with Gregor, his little isolation and loneliness.
Characterization. Mrs. Samsa, Gregor's mother, is diagnosed with asthma and did not work before Gregor's transformation. She loves Gregor, although when she first sees him as a bug, she faints. She has wanted to see him, but Grete and Mr. Samsa had advised against her doing that. She helps Grete move furniture in Gregor's room, believing he would be more comfortable, although she questions whether this will affect his humanity. Throughout the book, we see this as her being a caring mother, caring for her oldest son.
Characterization of Mr. Samsa, or Gregor's father. Retired from a failed business, Mr. Samsa rarely leaves the flat or his house and relies on his son to provide for the family. He has no patience for his son's predicament, or how he turned into a bug, losing his temper and injuring Gregor in fits of rage. When forced to return to work, however, Mr. Samsa's vigor seems to return, and he feels a sense of relief once Gregor dies and his family can move on.
Greta, she is Gregor's 17-year-old sister, and she took up the responsibility to look over him when he was a bug. During the start, she was very caring to him. She looked over his room, she cleaned it, she aired out the smell in his room, and she even tried to ask him what type of foods he would like, even though he was a bug and could hardly speak. And as the story progressed, she had to grow, she had to change as a person. She grew more woman-like. She picked up a job, and her personality changed. She stopped being so caring to him, and she left him to die.
Theme. Identity was the topic I chose. My theme was identity is not based on materialistic things. Kafka wrote this book with the theme of identity for himself as he was sort of melted into his work. Throughout the story, Gregor seems to lose himself gradually since he first becomes a bug. Not only does his physical appearance change, but psychologically, he changes as well. Preferences like what he eats and how he sleeps, this can be shown when the narrator states, "He didn't like the milk at all, although it used to be his favorite drink. In fact, he turned away from the bowl almost with repulsion." This quote can be found on page 20 through 21. Although Gregor was losing the idea of himself and who he was, his family was finding themselves again after being forced to work to meet their needs. An example of this could be when Mr. Samsa went from wearing a nightgown all the time to never taking off his uniform for work. This can be seen when the narrator states, "With a kind of perverse obstinacy, his father refused to take off his uniform even in the house, and while his robe hung uselessly on the clothes hook, his father dozed completely, dressed in his chair, as if he were always ready for duty and were waiting even here for the voices of his superior." Relevance. Identity is a struggle for a lot of people simply because some do not truly know themselves and are trying to find themselves still. Others melt within work like Gregor, but when that is taken away, what or who is left? The point of the theme of identity for this book is to illustrate the idea that one's identity isn't a singular entity or a movable object, as there are multiple pieces that make you who you are, and people can change.
Thank you for watching. 3, 2, 1.
Thank you for watching.
That was our analysis of the Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka.
Give it a like and subscribe.
Bye-bye. Alright, I'll edit that.